Hello.
Can only be attributable to human error.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Let me just switch it so people can see us. Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I'm a bit late.
That's all right, dude. These things happen. I had a wine emergency. Hopefully haven't destroyed my work laptop. I was in the process of moving everything over here, like keyboard and mouse stuff, and inadvertently knocked my wine over absolutely everything. Destroyed the only clean carpet in the house as well. So yeah, I'll find out tomorrow if everything.
You're gonna be killed?
Yeah. But yeah, it is what it is. I can't really complain too much because, I'm here doing a stream with you. I've still got a little bit of wine left. I was supposed to only have one glass. The fact that I knocked one over means that I can only have one glass. So,
Oh.
Have you been anyway?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm feeling much better now.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad.
Still a bit bunged up, as you can hear.
You don't sound that bad, dude.
Ah, nice one.
Coming through perfectly clear too.
Nice one.
Awesome. So I suppose we should get on with the stream for the night then. And tonight we're discussing power, but not just power. Are we, Dave? It's a specific sort of power.
Yeah. It's power in the sense of the ability to shape the conversation.
So, what do you mean by that?
Oh, there you go. Sorry, you'd frozen for a second there.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
I do apologize. Yeah. So, what do you mean by that specifically?
Well, if we consider something like a Facebook group for, say, Trump fans.
Yep.
They can, or like a conspiracy or flat earth type group on Facebook, they can control the kind of information that not only gets put in there, but also gets discussed. Any opposing views they can remove, or they can say, you're welcome to come in here and dispute us, but you can't behave in such and such a way. And say you can't present scientific evidence. It must be based so and so. So they control the conversation and they shape the way discussion is held. So they have the power to create the information flow.
I suppose you could even say that we do the same in our group. We say, you're allowed to make whatever argument you like, but you need to give it some form of support for the argument. So you don't necessarily need to provide scientific evidence, but you need to support your argument in a logical manner.
Exactly. It's a little different when it's institutional. If I kind of start from the beginning, it sort of follows on from what Martin was discussing last week with regards to power. So I'll go over a little bit of the same thing, but in a slightly different, detailed way. When it comes to power, most people see one dimension of power. They think of the idea of some person or group who is able to create obedience in another person or group. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So power could be considered a relationship between and among groups and or individuals. And while there are different arguments about what power is, we're probably best not focusing on all of them tonight.
Yeah.
So we'll focus on a couple of basics and move into the one that we want to discuss.
Okay.
So last week, Martin mentioned Dahl, who has a formula which goes like this. A has power over B to the extent that A can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do.
Right.
And he calls it an intuitive idea of power, which it would be because that's mostly how people see it. We mostly see the robber demanding money has power over, the one who's being robbed.
Hmm.
And that comes from a 1957 paper that he wrote. Um, so it's a relation between the power holder and the one who is being made to be obedient. So it's relational, and Dahl's definition could be considered confrontational
Yeah.
because, yeah, it comes out of a form of confrontation. Max, oops,
So,
sorry.
no, 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 just saying. So from that, I mean, you could even say within the work environment. Obviously, you might have your set duties that you're supposed to perform, but you might have someone that gets you to do extra duties. So it's not necessarily a as much of a bad one as being robbed or whatever, but actually, someone within the work environment is getting you to do something that you wouldn't usually do. Therefore, they have a form of power over you, using that sort of analogy.
That's right. A manager could force you to do overtime when you have better things to do at the weekend, but use a form of, well, if you don't do this, if you don't scratch my back, I won't scratch yours. You won't get the next holiday unless you do, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So, as Dahl puts it, it's the power to get you to do something that you wouldn't normally do, like you say.
Yeah.
Max Weber kind of refines that a little bit. In 1967, he wrote a paper and he redefined it in the sense of the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his own will despite resistance. So it's
Right.
pretty much the same thing.
But almost the
And
reverse as well, isn't it? If you're carrying out your own will, it's almost if going back to the work example, you manage to convince your boss to give you time off, even though you've used all your allotted days or something like that. Your will is to have that extra day off, and in that way, the boss shouldn't let you do it, but you've somehow convinced him, and that could almost be a form of power over your boss in that instance.
oh, yes, definitely. And of course, it works in the reverse too. Like, say you say, I'm not doing that overtime, and your boss says, well, you are, or you're fired. They have the power to make you do what you don't want to do,
Hmm.
even though you're saying, no, I don't want to do it.
Right.
So it's not a huge distinction from Dowell's, but it's there. It's just tweaked that little bit more to show that, because I suppose you could look at Dowell's as saying power comes from getting you to do something you might have wanted to do anyway, um, or you didn't want to do, but you were okay doing it. Um, but this says, even with resistance.
Yeah. Cool.
Um, so, like Dowell's, it's again based on confrontation. It's relational.
Hmm.
Um, what this could be considered is what Amy Allen refers to as power over. So A has power over B.
Hmm.
Amy Allen splits power into three different sort of dimensions. Um, oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Um, power over, power to, and power with. So Dahl and Weber could be considered power over.
Hmm.
I know they have the power to make you do something, but it comes from power over you. If they didn't have power over you, they couldn't have the power to make you do something.
So, what's an example of power to without the power over?
Um, okay, so you walk into a Pizza Hut and you want a burger, but all they sell is pizzas. They've limited your choice. Do you see what I mean? I know it's a terribly stupid and simple example, but it shows.
Yeah,
Um,
fair.
a better example would be in the workplace. Your boss doesn't allow unionization, so they don't allow posters to be put up.
Mhm.
And they say anybody who's caught talking about unionizing stands the chance of losing their job. So they have the power to shape the conversation within that kind of environment. And they don't necessarily have power over you because you could quit and you could start unionization from outside.
Mhm.
But while they're in there, the conversation is being shaped in a particular way. Think of Amazon or Elon Musk's company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm with you.
Um, so, like I say, Dahl and Weber fall into power over.
Mhm.
Now, there's a paper from 1962 written by Backrack, I hope I'm saying that right, and Baratz, and it
Almost sounds like
discusses.
Burt Bacharach.
It does, yeah. Um, I'm guessing that's his name. I probably should have looked up how to pronounce it, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And they discussed power in the form of the institution, power to shape how things are done. Like I say, in the case of Elon Musk or Amazon, it's unionization. Um, in, say, a school environment, the teacher picks the curriculum or the head picks the curriculum.
Mhm.
So they have the power to shape how young people see the world.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, like in America, anti communism propaganda in the schools creates that sense of communism is bad. Sorry, I'm still not completely over this cold.
That's all right, mate. Don't worry.
Um, so it sort of shapes the whole capitalism good, communism bad discussion. And even though the people might not see it, their subjectivity is being shaped. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so Backrack and Barat say that this sort of power is often overlooked. People don't see it, and sometimes it's even dismissed. Think of something like a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory, but you hear that this organization is shaping the conversation, and oh, you must be paranoid.
Yeah.
Um, the dismissal itself can even come from that institutional power
Mhm.
because people don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
Um, they they don't want to be seen with somebody who's looking to confront that power or cause problems because they don't want to be caught up in it. So they dismiss even the idea that it exists.
Mm.
I know it sounds a bit strange, but think of somewhere like Amazon where everybody knows that you will be punished for unionizing.
Mhm.
They're not going to want to be seen around anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair.
Yeah. So again, it shapes the conversation. Um, they also are what they basically argue is that power is exercised when A participates in making the decisions that affect B. So if you're if the bosses are anti-union, they make the decision not to unionize and to clamp down on any unionization. And that means that workers can't fight for their rights. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you.
Think of something like Trump now as well,
Mhm.
cutting down the post office,
Yep.
removing the post office boxes. He's shaping the way people can vote,
Yeah.
kind of rigging it in his favor, even if people dismiss that. He's making choices that affect how they can control their own lives.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one actually.
Yeah, and it's sort of happening in this country with the COVID
Mhm.
testing in particular places, and controlling the way people report it, how they can report it, using the media to have discussions about how people should get back to school.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the big ones was that it does more harm for the kids not to be in school than to be in school. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
that was an interesting one. I must have thought because I mean, I can understand the socializing side of things potentially, but on the educational front, they can do that at home. They might have trouble. Parents wise, obviously, might not be as well versed in some of the subjects. It does depend on the age of the children. I think the younger kids are probably it's easier to teach them their subject matter, but they might also need the socializing a little bit more. But if you did group classrooms and everybody still had those hangouts, um, then yeah, uh,
yeah.
but then the little ones obviously struggle to. Oh, hey, Josh. The little ones struggle to. I forgot what I was going to say. I was
That's all
distracted by
right.
saying hello.
Well, you raise an interesting one there, actually, with schools. Here's another form of that. Something that's popular in Christian communities in America is homeschooling.
Yes.
So they can control what that child learns. Ooh, evolution? No, it's false.
Yeah.
So they have the power to shape the way that conversation goes and shape the way the person thinks, their children think, and they can make them anti science, that kind of stuff. So that's
Hmm.
how that kind of power works. It's in the background. It's
Yeah, no,
um,
that's interesting. I actually knew someone when I lived out there. In fact, when I went to revisit friends from when I lived out there, they were friends with this girl who had been taken out of school because she did figure skating, but her parents were very very Christian, and um, they didn't like the fact that they were teaching things like evolution in the school, and they took her out of school so that they could control exactly what she learned. So yeah, I mean that's a bit different to how the schools are being done over here. They've got those online classrooms; they're being sent homework and things like that. Um, it's probably a bit harder to enforce punishments and things like that. And I'm sure there are some parents who just leave the kids in the room and the kids don't do anything all day, and they go like, whatever. Um,
yeah.
so then there are obvious problems with the whole homeschooling thing, and obviously if the parents are at home, it means at least one adult needs to be at home um, with them. Again, depending on the age, which then means that there's at least one person who is out of work if the other one can work. I'm quite lucky in the sense that I can work from home. Ivy's a bit young to look after at the same time as working, but she was a couple of years older. It would be actually quite easy for me to do my job around her and around her naps. I'm very lucky because I've got a data based job. Whereas other people, it's a lot more difficult, and I do understand the impact that things can have on the economy. Um, yeah, it's a tough one with COVID, though, isn't it? Really, there's so many different factors, and so many different things that it can affect, and it is really hard to know what the best thing to do is. I almost think that they should have done from the start. They should have got the whole world on board and gone right, full on lockdown. No one's allowed out unless they're delivering groceries or something like that. They're the only sort of people who are allowed out. Whole month, there you go, lock it down. No one's allowed to visit anyone, and I feel that we'd be in a much better state around the entire world. And it's almost too late to do that now. I think there are too many people who have it who may be asymptomatic and etc.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And of course, the conversations that the MPs have and the rules that they enforce have the power to shape how you can respond to it.
Yeah, this is true. Josh just raised a question. Actually, he says, "How would you categorize the fact that Christianity puts persecution on a pedestal?"
In terms of what? Like
Uh,
it with regards to power.
yeah, yeah. So I suppose it's, oh, we're being persecuted, Christian persecution. Oh, they're not letting us do our thing. They're not letting us have Christianity in schools. Therefore, we're being persecuted.
Yeah, that's kind of a response to the power to that they see and the power over that they see falsely, but what they think is happening to them.
Mm,
Um, it like it's not an actual form of power that they're exercising when they say we're being persecuted, but they're responding to perceptions of other people shaping their power.
So he says, it's sort of like a way of controlling people, in a way.
It can be, because the pastors who
Hmm.
are creating that conversation and using that to reinforce their own power base.
Hmm.
Like, oh, look, they're canceling Christmas. We should all gather together and unite and stop this from happening, even though Christmas isn't being canceled. But it creates uh, like a resistance. It rallies emotions. So it's the pastors having the power to shape that conversation
Yeah,
because the Christians won't listen to people who say it's not happening because they think they're just trying to hide the persecution.
yeah. And he raises another one as well. They almost use it as a form of validation. I told you they said we were gonna. Sorry, I'll say that again. I told you they were going to say we were crazy, and it sort of validates their permission by saying, yeah, they're clearly going to say. I suppose conspiracy theorists do the same thing as well, don't they? They go, yeah, I told you the scientists were going to say we're wrong. It's all a
Yeah,
big conspiracy. It's that sort of controlling the narrative, isn't it?
exactly. And that gives them it sort of gives them power over, but not in the sense that the confrontational aspect of it does. It they're controlling the conversation gives them power to make other people do things.
Mm.
Even if they don't see it happening to themselves, that shaping of the narrative has happened
Hmm.
and has, made that, say, the pastor be able to make those Christians do something that they might not otherwise have done.
Hmm.
Um, so that's basically what power two is. A really extreme example of it is the Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984?
It's one of the ones I've always meant to read but haven't actually read yet. So no.
Well, okay. Well, they have a thing called newspeak, and
Hmm.
that is that they redefine what words mean and what words are acceptable. And by redefining what the words mean and what the people can actually say, what words are acceptable, they shape all the conversations and shape how those people see the world and ultimately have power over them because they're creating a kind of subjectivity,
Mm.
one that is reliant on language. And so people can't really truly express themselves. That's like a really extreme example, though.
Well, I mean, we could use one. I mean, that we've both read, which is Brave New World. I don't know if you've
Yes.
been watching the TV series either.
I watched the first episode and I wasn't particularly keen, to be honest.
Oh,
It
it's
was
very different.
okay, but it didn't feel Brave New World.
They've modernized it. It is very different, but they've got certain bits in it that are the same. I've still really been enjoying it. You're right though; it doesn't feel as good as the book. I suppose it's like the thing with the Disney remakes, though. If it had been exactly the same, you'd be like, nothing new there. And if it was a completely, when they've done things differently, you're like, oh, well, it's not the same. It's hard to know what would be best in that situation. Although I don't think there's ever been um, a movie or TV show of Brave New World before.
That
There has
has
a.
from the 80s.
Oh, there has. Oh, I might have to check
Yeah.
that one out. Was it a bit more true to the books?
Yeah, yeah, a lot more. And it one thing that I didn't like about this new one, at least in the first episode, is it didn't really capture the points that Huxley was trying to make.
Mm.
It had some of the aesthetics and some of the atmosphere, but it missed some of the points.
Yeah, it doesn't really explain how people are engineered to be a certain way and how people are conditioned. There's a few nods to, well, they're just responding to their conditioning. And there's a few betas going, well, it's better to be a beta because blah, blah, blah. Yes, and the alphas think that too. But there isn't that whole look where he takes you through things and he takes you through the schools and you see how the kids are being conditioned and almost forced to go out and have sex with each other and all of that sort of stuff going on. And it doesn't, yeah, as I said, doesn't explain how. I can't remember what it is that actually goes into the embryos to affect them to grow them in a certain way, but. Also, the epsilons seem almost a little bit too switched on in it. I don't know if you got to meet any of them, but yeah, you're right. But anyway, to the point, this is to do with the power to control people. Basically, everybody is conditioned to think a certain way, and everybody is also given a drug called soma, which is a bit like heroin in a way, but it comes in a little pill format. And anytime anyone feels a little bit upset about anything, their levels are off. They just pop another one, and they might have different colors for different strengths, etc. Um, and yeah, basically everybody is conditioned to be happy, but every now and then a spanner gets sort of thrown in the works in this sort of environment, and it's this whole story about someone coming back from the savage lands, which is basically a reservation for people who live the old way, as in the way we live currently. So there's still religion and monogamy and relationships and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And they by saying that people aren't allowed to make those attachments, they change or like having conversations about those attachments by the institution choosing how people can interact. They have the power to shape that environment and shape how people behave. And that's essentially what Power 2 is.
Yeah, awesome. So then the
Um,
last one you had to mention was Power With.
well, that's Hannah Arendt,
Right.
and that's unionization.
Mm-hmm.
So if the people with Power 2 shape the conversation where unionization isn't allowed, it stops Power With.
Mm.
And the Power With would be everybody in a plant who's working in dangerous conditions decides to down tools and go home until those conditions are fixed and safe. So if they can control that, they can stop the Power With and they can carry on being as cost effective as possible.
So it's sort of the way strikes work and things like that.
Yeah, people combined have the power to control their destinies in certain environments, which is would be Power With. Um,
Is it called Power With because it's power with others? So
yeah, basically a group of people all combined together to combine their strength and enforce their will on people who might be resistant.
so another form of that could be a gang.
Yes, exactly. Except usually they're slightly more violent and they use the power over
Yeah.
rather than they use their power with to create power over, and it's the power over that gets people to do what they want to do.
Yeah. Fair.
Um, and the interesting thing about this is what basically been building up to is something like the YouTube algorithm.
Mm.
If we look at the YouTube algorithm, it promotes certain ideas and certain viewpoints. Um, I know we're probably never going to be able to get monetized after this now.
We just have to choose a careful title when we post it to YouTube.
Yeah. Um, but they can control the information flow, and they do control the information flow. Like during COVID, you weren't allowed to mention the word COVID or you would be demonetized.
Really?
Yeah.
Blimey.
And people couldn't put it in their video titles. If they mentioned it in the videos, then they would be demonetized. So they were controlling the flow of the conversation using the bribe of money.
Blimey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I thought where you were going to go with the YouTube thing, you were going to be speaking more of the suggested videos and things like
Oh,
that, which
yeah, there's that to
obviously
come.
would include to it. But you're actually, yeah. So the rules and regulations that they actually put in place, there are certain things you can and can't say. So it probably does mean that they've got an algorithm there that if you ever say the words YouTube, that someone might actually get an alert to check your video and make sure you're not saying anything that's slagging them off.
Exactly.
Well,
But the suggested videos thing is also another example. If you consider, say, the alt-right pipeline now,
mm-hmm,
now I watch a lot of leftist content like Philosophy Tube, Thought Slime, and a few others. And when you watch them, you'll notice Steven Crowder videos coming in or Black Pigeon Speaks when he was still around. You would notice counters to the leftist content you were watching.
mm-hmm,
So people would move, say, maybe click that reactionary content without knowing what it is, and that would shape them towards that way. I don't
mm,
know if the same happens in reverse, where leftist content gets promoted if you watch a lot of alt-right YouTube, because I don't watch a lot of alt-right YouTube, obviously.
mm. Well, if
Um,
any of our listeners out there do tend to watch a lot of right-leaning or center-leaning stuff, do you find that you're suddenly put in either to the left or to the right or whatever isn't your position? Do you find that your position is counted by the YouTube algorithm, or is it only the left that get put onto the right? Let us know. If you don't let us know in the stream, that's fine. Just either DM us on Twitter or Facebook or email admin@answersinreason.com. That's answers dash in dash reason.com.
but yeah, I mean, like you say, the suggested YouTube things can be used as a form of power too, and I think it's probably being used that way, I guess. I don't know. Um, but it is one way it could be used. And the threat of demonetization
Mm-hmm.
is also one that can be used to shape how the conversation goes because a lot of people rely on YouTube for whatever reason, like
Mm-hmm.
say extra money or they make their careers out of it. Um, and hence the introduction of something like Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
People were getting demonetized, so Patreon jumped on that. People give money to whoever they think deserves it.
Mm-hmm.
But YouTube can still, for those who aren't good enough to get a lot of Patreons, they
Mm-hmm.
rely on that
Mm-hmm.
YouTube monetization. So YouTube can shape the kind of discussions that they can have. Family friendly, advertising friendly, profit friendly. Of course, you could choose not to go with the monetization and still have some sense, but the YouTube algorithm, and this happened to a YouTuber called Thought Slime recently,
Right.
and just as an easy example, he made a criticism of Steven Crowder, who was bullying another online journalist, and Thought Slime's video got false flagged for bullying.
What?
Yeah, a lot of alt-righters and right-leaning people who were fans of Steven Crowder decided to take down the criticism of Steven Crowder by reporting it for bullying. And because of the way YouTube's algorithm works, there's nobody who vets these. It just goes, "Oh, this has had X amount." of complaints for bullying, therefore it must be bullying. Let's remove the video.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've heard lots of people complain on Twitter about their videos being reported and the content, not being anything negative, and it's just trolls, etc., or people that don't like them doing it. So yeah, and the contesting process is awful. Um, Sometimes they don't get the video reviewed at all, and yeah,
So yeah, so that gives the alt-righters the power to shape leftist content. Does that make sense?
yeah, it definitely does.
Um, and
Well,
that could be an example of both power with and power over,
yeah,
using power to.
yeah, the ultimate power.
It kind of is, really. Um, but again, it's the expression of power that the YouTube algorithm allows.
Mm. So this isn't necessarily YouTube's fault in themselves. They've probably got, they have got bigger and bigger over the years, and they've put in these measures to make the management a lot easier for them. But unfortunately, taking out some of the human element to review these things has left it open for people to do this sort of thing. And essentially, it's a form of bullying in itself, really, if a group of people can get videos taken down that just because they disagree with them rather than there's actually any real nasty content in it.
Exactly. It's it is bullying. It's saying if you discuss me in a way I don't like, my fans will have that removed. And as far as I know, with YouTube, if you have a certain amount of strikes against you for a certain amount of behaviors, your channel gets shut down. And if you rely on that channel for Patreon money or YouTube money,
You're
then you
screwed.
will have to fall in line.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's one of the biggest problems with using someone else's platform. It's one of the problems I think that has happened with the internet. It used to be a thing that was generally just like nerds and geeks using it, like me, barely anyone else on it, and it was like freedom because there was no real sort of freedom in the world. It was all so controlled, whereas online everything was open and everything was free. But
It
then
was the Wild West.
it was, yeah, it really, really, really was. But then it became more popular, and things like telephones started having the internet on it, and there's social media popping up. People having MySpace. Oh, look, I've got this tune on my page, and you're just like, yeah, I've run a blog for the last few years, and oh no, I use MySpace.
Yeah.
No, on the online diaries and all of that sort of thing, and um, yeah, and all of a sudden you get people who aren't necessarily as technologically sound using these platforms, and I've got no real problem with that. But obviously, with more people, all of a sudden corporations get involved, and they make platforms that all of a sudden they have restrictions on, and they have every right to. It's their platform. They do have the right to say you can't say this on our platform. You can't be abusive on our platform. We don't want that sort of thing. That's fine. But when it comes to things like you mentioned there, Dave, controlling the narrative in such a way, and in fact having a platform that not only they control the narrative, but you allow a large group of people to control the narrative, it makes it so much worse. It's actually a real problem. But how would you change an algorithm like that?
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? If you're looking for profits, and it all comes down to profits, because if you think about it, one of the reasons that they're doing it is to encourage advertising money for YouTube. So then those companies who are putting their money into advertising have the power to shape the narrative.
Yep.
Um, so it all becomes this vicious cycle of each person wanting to control particular narratives, and the one who gives the most money gets to shape the way the YouTube algorithm responds. Because as far as I know, there was, with the Thought Slime case, there was an appeal, and it was pointed out that Steven Crowder is quite offensive and can be quite bullying. And because Steven Crowder brings in a lot of money, it was more sort of, oh, no, 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 no. There's nothing wrong with him. Stop criticizing him or you're going to be removed. That kind of thing. So they have the power to shape how people see Steven Crowder, say.
Yeah. Josh has a question. He says, how may this power and control be beneficial? So one thing that you could say is that level of control can stop things like child porn being shared. That
Oh,
that
yes,
sort of thing
definitely.
is a good thing that people should have control over. I definitely think that sort of thing. Can you think of any other examples though, where this sort of power and control through various algorithms, etc., are positive, Dave?
Yep. One of the things that they've started to do, I don't know if you've noticed or anybody else has noticed, is there's little information like like on Twitter when Donald Trump posts something that's obviously false, it posts up like an
Fact check.
information alert.
Yeah.
Yeah. YouTube does the same thing. So under flat earth videos now, there's a little thing that pops up that says this is the flat earth. It's kind of a conspiracy theory. It's not backed up by science. Go and read here. So they kind of use that power to shape the narrative to help move people away from the flat earth. While the flat earthers try to shape the narrative and say, oh, no, no, don't listen to the scientists, YouTube is using that algorithm to combat that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And YouTube now allows stuff about COVID. In the beginning, it didn't. And I'm guessing it's something to do with, I don't know if you heard about Trump saying he didn't want to create a panic.
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, he withheld information apparently and didn't speak about certain things because he didn't want to create a panic. I don't buy it for a minute. I think he's just an idiot, but
Yep.
um, possibly that's why YouTube weren't doing it. But they allow it now. And under videos that speak about COVID, it gives a COVID information alert. So it allows them to shape the narrative. Or say anti-maskers.
Yeah.
When anti-maskers make a video, a COVID alert goes under one of their videos.
Yeah, that's good. So there are some benefits to this control and power, as well as it potentially having negative side effects. So it depends largely on the money side of things, but also it is good that they're at least promoting decent science in that regard. Did you see the thing the other day as well? As we're on COVID and Trump, about him talking about herd mentality rather than herd
Yeah,
immunity.
rather than herd immunity. I mean, he does have a herd mentality
He
behind
does.
him.
He very
Yeah,
much does. And that is what is actually making things a hell of a lot worse in the COVID world, for at least in
yeah.
America. Yes.
And here's another example, though, that's a good thing. If you think about Trump, from the very beginning, yeah, I know. From the very beginning, though, he started with his fake news narrative.
Yes.
Don't trust this, don't trust that, don't trust them. They lie, they lie, they lie. And people started believing it. And that shaped the conversation in favor of Trump. If
Hmm.
somebody says something bad about Trump, well, it's obviously just they've got Trump mania.
Yep.
I think that's what it's called these days. Uh, Trump derangement syndrome.
Josh has just put a message in. He's an abomination to Oompa Loompas everywhere.
Yep, I can agree with that one. Um, but again, he had the power to shape how people responded to criticisms of him. And that has shaped how people can criticize Trump or how effective it is to criticize Trump. Most
mm,
people, you criticize Trump to most Trumpsters, and it's like, oh, no, no, it's fake news.
yeah.
Um, and here's one that's sort of topical for what we normally speak about when it comes to atheism and religion. I've already discussed about Christians and homeschooling. Now think of people like Aaron Ra, Matt Dillahunty, who have large platforms and they're shaping the conversation about what atheism is.
Hmm.
And of course, they have the power to because they belong to institutions. the atheist experience is quite a big, well-known name, looked up to. It could be considered institutional within certain sectors of the atheist community who look to them for not guidance and inspiration, but look to them for information
Hmm.
and trust them because they put themselves forward as this rational, truth seeking show.
Yep.
Um, so they promote lack theism
Hmm.
or the lack of belief. I don't mean it insulting when I say lack theism. I just use that term to denote it from philosophical atheism.
No, and this is one of the things that I find interesting when they get so offended by you saying lacktheism and lacktheist, because if they're saying that the a means without, which is the same as lack, so that is lack. So instead of atheism, it does translate to lacktheism. So they're not using it the a as not as in negation, as in God does not exist. So yeah, I don't know why they take such offense to that sort of thing, but perhaps it's because they're so tied into the word atheist that they find anything that contests that an issue.
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I think they take on atheism as some sort of representation of other things like rationality, logic. It says something about their smartness. So if they don't get called atheist, they're being denigrated.
Yeah, and we see that quite often with those that are being prescriptive with the definition. They go, "Yeah, I understand there's different definitions, but everybody should use mine." And you
Yeah,
go, "Yeah, no, it doesn't matter that in philosophy I'd be an agnostic. I'm an atheist."
yeah.
Um, it's that
And
sort of thing.
if you think back to Aaron Raw's recent blog post where he quoted, yeah, I'm sorry, I should have waited till you finished drinking.
Luckily, it was only a little sip.
Hi. Um, but he's members of certain institutions, like what was it, American Atheists
Yeah,
Alliance?
he's one of the directors of American Atheists. He's also in the Atheist Alliance of America as well. Or
Yeah.
one of those ones like that. Yeah.
And they both define atheism as only a lack of belief. And he quoted those two organizations. So he shapes the narrative within the institution and then uses the institution to shape the narrative outside of the institution.
But then also within that, he was quoting other things that defined it, saying atheism can mean this, 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 and this. And he'd go, "See, I told you I'm right." And he'd focus on the one bit in it that it agreed with him. It's like the whole point of that conversation that we were having was the fact that atheism's polysemous, and you can use whichever one you want. These are the reasons we use this one, and that's why you use that one. And it's like, no, it's only a lack belief. Mine is the original and correct definition. And throughout his own article debunked himself. If you want to know more about that one, though, I've written an article summarizing that. In fact, a complete response to his article, called "In Response to Ra's What Is Atheism." There are also 3 videos that we did with Chesh available on YouTube as well. So we did quite a lot there. That was probably about 9 hours worth of video in total,
Yeah.
wasn't it? So whether you prefer reading or watching, or read and watch both, I mean, see if you can notice any problems between the two. Definitely worth doing, but we'll move on from that one just for now.
But again, because he has this sort of institutional power, I know a
Hmm.
lot of people say, oh, he has no power in the atheist community because there's no leaders. When people say that, yeah, exactly. There are people that look up to these people and take what they say as not gospel, that's not the right word, but they will say, well, that person is more respected than you, so therefore he knows what he's talking about. Or he's bigger in the community, so therefore he must know what he's talking about. Because there's this sort of idea where if you weren't right, you wouldn't get so big.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and Aaron Raw promotes reason and rationality, and he promotes truth seeking. So therefore, if he says this is the truth,
It must be.
it must be. And he's in these atheist organizations, so they wouldn't let him in if he didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And he uses that, so when he says, "Well, this is my thing, eh, look at these things only," people will look at those things only. He uses that power to shape the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the thing is, there are certain things like science that and his arguments against creationism and stuff like that that he gets bang on right, you know. And I think this is the thing that he's had is because he's gone up. Oops, sorry.
Bully.
Because he's gone all the way up in a certain line, he suddenly figured that because he's at this level with this particular topic, he's at this level with every topic. But actually, it's that whole Dunning Kruger thing. Because he's got this much confidence with this one, he's got that much confidence with them all. Except his knowledge is all the way down here, and he needs to realize how much he doesn't actually know about these topics. We even had that with that conversation the other day. I mean, Stephen Hawking is an amazing man, one of the most brilliant minds, or was an amazing man, one of the most brilliant minds that probably have ever existed on this planet. But he didn't like philosophy, but he hadn't really ever studied philosophy that much, as far as I know from everything that I've read on him. I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but he made statements like philosophy is dead. So she took his word over ours, making philosophical statements herself. uh,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, well, he's smarter than you. He knows more, so I'll take his word over you. And so, well, that is an argument from authority. And don't get me wrong, not every argument from authority is necessarily fallacious. You know, I would trust a plumber, especially if they had a good rating on those sites that the you rate your traders on, that he does know more than me about plumbing, because I know absolutely nothing more than turning my taps on and off. But I wouldn't necessarily trust him on, the creation of the universe, uh, or something like that. And people do this with these leaders in particular fields, like Ra, who suddenly is making all these philosophical judgments and statements, and they're wrong.
Yeah. Um, and like I say, that's the power too that they have. They can shape the narrative, and it can be kind of depressing. Another example, and one you'll relate to. Think of the statement, "Ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule." Now that's
Mm.
yeah. Now that's popular within the atheist community, and it's really spread in certain Facebook groups, and I think Christopher Hitchens used to promote it. And if we look at how well revered Christopher Hitchens was and still is to some extent, Dawkins said it. I think Sam Harris might have said it. I can't remember.
It's
Um,
even to the point where that statement's been used so much that one of the definitions of ridiculous in a dictionary has become something that is deserving of ridicule.
yeah. Um, so those who said that shaped the conversation, and now what we see is a lot of atheists jumping into any conversation that they perceive might be about religion, might be about God, and spamming it with memes and saying, "Prove your God, prove your God, prove your God. You can't prove your God. You're irrational." And behaving kind of irrationally because they're just, if you say, "We're not talking about God, we're talking about something else," it might be on the periphery. They'll go, "Well, you have to prove your God, or you're a theist in disguise."
We had this exact thing occur the other day, actually. Intrigued Feline, who, if you've seen her on Twitter, she's great. She's actually helped me edit a few of my articles. I've even made her an editor on the site to just help me edit them, because I'm dyslexic and my grammar and spelling is quite often poor. Although my last article, she said she only had to make a couple of tweaks to, which is brilliant. But
Nice one.
she asked us a couple of questions, and it was, oh, what was the actual one about? It was
It
asking
was, if you thought God wasn't necessary, would apatheism be a good fit to fall into?
So what this followed on from was a discussion of various ontological positions that we'd been having. It'd come up in the streams and everything like that. Apatheism is someone that does not care whether God exists or not, and therefore doesn't really consider the proposition at all. It's sort of one of those withholding judgment positions, but so she was asking that particular statement, does it fit that one best? And we had a little discussion about it, and this guy suddenly jumps in with a meme. Yeah, you need to prove your God. And we're like, there's no conversation about proving God here. None of us actually believe in a God. She's an agnostic, and Dave and I are atheists. Well, you still need to prove your God.
Yeah, and when I had him on mute, but I was clicking on a few of them, and when you were trying to tell him that it wasn't a discussion about God, he was like, "Well, I don't care. Um, you're defending religious people. You are guilty by association, so therefore you have to prove this God that you're defending people believe in." And nothing like that was going on.
No. But this is one of the things that I even spoke to him and said, this is one of the key negative behaviors that we see from new atheism. They're basically the fundamentalists of atheism. They're completely irrational in the same way YECs are. New atheism doesn't exist. Right? Would you like to prove that claim? I don't have to prove my claims. Atheism asserts nothing. Okay, so
Yeah.
do you want to prove that claim? I'm not making claims. That's another claim.
And if you look at Facebook groups and Facebook echo chambers and say Twitter echo chambers as a form of an institution in and of itself, like a mini one, and all of them have certain people that you see in each group passing information, those conversations in there have the power to shape how people behave outside of it.
Yeah.
And it sort of engineers the kind of conversations and responses that people will have outside, because they're repeating catchphrases. They're sort of giving off new atheist tropes, I guess might be one way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is those little institutions that are shaping the conversations, shaping the way people behave. So the people that run those groups have the power to create how people respond.
Yeah. We've just had, in fact, Josh asked a question a minute ago, but he just also said these live streams are my church.
Hallelujah.
That makes you the Pope.
No, I haven't got a cool bubble car.
I know. We need to get you an interesting hat as well. But his question earlier, though, was so we were speaking about Ra at the time, but it was how about the power people actually give him? It's enough to make rational people act irrationally.
Yeah, it kind of is. And it is those followers giving him the power to do these things, because they're sort of reinforcing that power that he has, and then he then uses that power to reinforce his own power. I thought you were about to put a balaclava on and rob me.
I could probably do that.
That's not how COVID masks work.
uh,
So yeah, that's basically. I thought it might be an interesting change to discuss something like how power works within these groups and how certain people and certain institutions like YouTube shape things. I mean, another example, going back to YouTube, skepticism was really
One
popular for.
second. 1 second. Before we do that, Josh has actually said something that is quite poignant in a way. The power people give him takes away his ability to change his mind as well. He might actually have wanted to turn around and agree with us that actually maybe the rock theist stance was ridiculous. I mean, there were plenty of people that were telling him it was stupid, but he had his little tribe telling him, yeah, you're right, yeah, implicit atheism, anything not a theist is definitely an atheist. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true in this case, because he is trying to. He's arguing for ideological reasons. He wants to increase his voting numbers. So if he can just actually say anyone that doesn't believe, or anything that doesn't believe in a god, is an atheist, therefore, all of you people who don't identify as theists, you are atheists. That gives him that power. And I think he's genuinely arguing from an ideological standpoint. He has his conclusion in mind and finds everything that fits with it and ignores everything that disagrees with it, much in a way that creationists argue creation hasn't happened, let's see what fits with it. However, you could be right in what you're saying there, Josh, that there are probably some things that he might want to change his mind on. He might have gone, oh crap, maybe I am wrong about that. But so many people have bought into this narrative that if he was to turn around and go, oh, actually, maybe I was wrong, he's afraid that these people would drop him and move on to someone else.
Oh yeah, that I absolutely agree. I think Josh raises a very good point there. Their power with gives them the power to shape Aaron Ra's own responses, and then he uses his power that sort of as the leader of this little institution to reinforce that again and just keep symbiotically feeding that power structure.
Mm.
It actually goes back to something I said the other week. Remember what I said about ridiculous beliefs deserving ridicule being used as a form of policing within the atheist community as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, so people get this ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule. I'm an atheist. I want to be in the atheist community. If I go against something that all these other atheists say, they might think I'm ridiculous, ridicule me, and I'll be out of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be something similar to that going on where Aaron Ra loses the power to change the conversation. He can shape it in a way that it's already been molded, but he might not be able to change the conversation entirely.
Yeah, I suppose that's similar in the way that I sometimes get called a theist troll for trying to explain epistemic justification. Trying to explain that there is more than just someone making a claim, having to prove it true. There's, supporting your position with rational reasoning. And they just don't even listen to that because that's another one they've had. The burden's on the claimant. The burden's on the claimant. You're right. The burden is on the claimant. It is, but there's more to it than that. you know,
Yeah.
any belief position, even the lack of belief, has a burden, but it's a burden of rationality. The Big Bang is the same sort of thing. It wasn't actually an explosion. It was a sensationalized headline that got people interested in the whole theory. And the burden of proof, again, it's one of those things that make people think, oh, well, the word proof is in there, so therefore it means you have to prove it true. No, you just have to prove your position rational if it's a belief position.
Well, I mean, you could kind of narrow it down. A lot of them claim to be rational, so they're making the claim of rationality, so therefore they have to prove that claim by justifying their beliefs.
Exactly, but they don't.
No. And again, like you said, that's an example of little groups having the power to shape the conversation within the atheist community. And I know people say, well, the atheist community doesn't really exist, or there's no leaders, or there's no central authority. There kind of is. There's a kind of reinforcement of mythos, like going back to the conversation you were having the other day. I can't remember his name now. I'm sorry. I've got a cloudy head still.
Tim O'Neill.
Tim, that's it, Tim O'Neill, where he discussed certain myths within the atheist community, like the Library of Alexandria. Those are all reinforced within the communities because you have people going from group to group. You have memes that get shared around the groups. So while there might not be a central body, there is a sort of central informational kind of structure that goes around the people that hang around in these places.
Mm-hmm.
And those things shape the conversation. So meme makers have the power to shape the conversation. The the admins of the groups could say no, but because they're concerned with criticizing Christianity and looking good and getting followers, they accept these and they become the norm and they shape the conversation.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting. Memes as a form of power.
They
I need
kind
to.
of are.
Yeah, I need to make some more.
I mean, it's why they're popular in the alt right
Yeah.
because memes do have that kind of power. If you think of Britain First,
Mm.
they used Facebook to shape conversations and shape the popularity. And they would do it in sort of ubiquitous ways like, oh, look at this poor dog. He was abused. Click here to like and share. And then they would start getting Britain First memes in their thing. And people wouldn't pay that much attention, but they would take the information in.
Actually, you saying that, this brings me back to an article that I wrote about tribalism, fundamentalist fanboys, and conspiracy theories, or something like that. And one of the focuses on it was David Wolf and how can anyone take him seriously. But if you actually followed what he did a similar sort of thing. He shares loads of like loving and hippy dippy sort of memes that seem like, yeah, cool, groovy guy, yeah, peace, love, da 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 da. Anti-vaxxer meme, da 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 da. Oh, love, yeah, everything's great, da da da. The Earth's flat, da da da. And there's all this positive stuff going on, and then all of a sudden there's this thing in there, and you're like, well, he can't be lying to me, man. He's such a cool, groovy guy, and he's almost built this attitude where, I mean, it's a sales technique. One of the key sales techniques, and this is something that's covered in NLP as well, is if you get someone saying yes, 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 by the time you've got them to say yes at least 3 times in a row, the next thing they're going to say that is just yes. They're not even going to think
Reflexive.
about it. Exactly. So, and you might have this whole conversation with someone, and then at the end of it, so your name's this, and you do this, and da 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 da, and you want to buy this product, and they're just going to go yeah,
Yeah.
and
And again,
there you go, it just worked.
but again, that's the power too,
Yeah,
in a slightly more reduced idea.
yeah. We're just saying yes now, Dave. We're
Yeah.
just nodding at each other and saying
Yeah,
yes.
just say yes.
Yeah.
I'm almost smart, you know. Um, Going back to another thing with YouTube though, and the algorithm. If you remember back in the early days of New Atheism and when it exploded on YouTube, there was a lot of skeptics like Bionic Dance and Armored Skeptic and Atheism is Unstoppable, Chris Reagan, a whole bunch of them. I, Bionic Dance isn't guilty of what I'm about to mention, but some of the others are. And they would go after easy targets like Christianity and believers and whatnot. And slowly, the money from that started to die off because it was the same conversation over and over. And
Mm,
it moved over to anti SJW, anti feminism.
interesting.
Um, and some of them have now moved on to like race realism and stuff like that. So YouTube would recommend their videos to people who would watch skeptic content. So it slowly moved the conversation in the skeptic community to anti SJW, that kind of stuff, anti feminism. And that became popular. And that shaped the conversation that was being done in the skeptic community. And people jumping into the skeptic community would find that conversation going on and have their views shaped by that conversation.
Interesting. It sounds like you and I should do some gaming videos,
And
and get some gamers interested in philosophy.
then slowly move the content over.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of did this wrong. What we really should have done is doing a bunch of streams that were like, oh yeah, atheism is just a lack of belief, and then slowly introduced.
Well,
But I
actually,
would
maybe it's
actually,
not.
yeah, no, I would actually feel dirty and tarnished.
Yeah, I couldn't necessarily do that myself. Um, in fact, that is something. If ever I am on, I write on Twitter, I've decided atheism is only a lack of belief in gods. You know, I've been kidnapped and held against my will.
I'll send the SAS. But yeah, again, that's another example of the YouTube algorithm being used as a form of power too.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, when the money changed again, and more money was in like race realism or anti-Black Lives Matter is another popular one at the moment. Um, Anti-feminism is still kind of popular. Like when Captain Marvel came out, there were hundreds of videos criticizing what's her name again?
Well, Captain Marvel.
No, the actress. So
Ladyface? I don't know. I don't remember actors
yeah,
and actresses. Come on.
I'm too fuzzy-headed to remember, but there was a bunch of videos criticizing her and people jumping on that bandwagon, and that made people criticize her and reinforce the conversation.
Yeah. On the subject of names, though, I just want to clarify why I said ladyface. It's just because I'm absolutely terrible at names. For example, one of my best friends now, I used to know him for 3 months as the guy that looked like the guy that played the Indian guy in Short Circuit. Um, and
Yeah,
that's
I'm
all
not
he was to
particularly
me.
good.
His name is Lee, though. I know this now. I even went to his wedding. So, it's Brie Larson. Brie Larson,
Brie
thank you,
Larson,
Josh.
that's it. Yeah, she became a really hated figure, within the anti-SJW, anti-feminist comic following group. And Star Wars. Daisy Ridley, she was another one who everybody hated. She was a Mary Sue, she was ruining Star Wars, and I started seeing some of these appear in my YouTube recommendations because I followed Star Wars content.
Mm, yeah,
So,
interesting. Oh, I suppose that is kind of related in a way, but
yeah.
yeah.
Um, but again, if you think about the current climate, there is the BLM gaining popularity. So there is a reason for certain institutional powers to want to kind of counteract it. Um, so the YouTube algorithm can be used in that manner, even if it's not. I can't say it's actually being done on purpose. And even if it's not, it still is happening and shaping conversations.
Mm, yeah, it's interesting. Uh, I mean, the simplest answer would be it's just the tags that people are putting in. Like you see on our site, we've got tags and categories, and we've got related articles at the end, and 3 articles pop up that either one have similar tags, two have similar categories, or three have similar sort of words going throughout it. So it's something on beliefs will show another thing on beliefs, and if there isn't another one on beliefs, it will jump up to epistemology. Oops, sorry. So it might go on to truth or knowledge or something like that. Um, so it could be as innocent as that, in the fact that you're interested in Star Wars and they've got a Star Wars tag in their thing, and you haven't watched this video yet. It's hard to know how it's programmed.
Well, one of the other things is it's not just that. Channels have to be a certain size, videos have to have had a certain amount of views. It's the popularity that gets it into that. So these people can use that algorithm to game and get as many views as possible, rewatch it until it gets big enough to get into that recommended feeds.
I see. It's all a bit gamey, isn't it?
It kind of is. It's pheasant, really.
Sorry?
It's pheasant.
Pheasant? Like the bird?
It's gamey. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
game bird.
Right, yes. I'm
I
a
don't
bit
know.
slow. Sorry, glass of wine and I'm gone.
Yeah, I'm not particularly bright today. I'm not particularly bright at any time, but, I'm less so today. But yeah, so the YouTube algorithm is an expression of power. Even if it's not YouTube, that institution is being used by other bodies to create and shape the conversation.
Sorry, that was Josh because he got your joke and I didn't.
Ah, thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's an expression of power. It might not have been the intention of YouTube itself, but the platform that they have set up at least allows people to abuse the platform. Well, not necessarily even abuse it, I guess, but use it in a way that lets them control the narrative. And because YouTube is about the views, the hits, the money, which is a business, it's supposed to be at the end of the day, but that then they've got this massive following, and because you're interested in this thing that has this tiny little overlap here, you're suddenly told, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this. So it comes back. We need to find what the popular games are, Dave, and have some gaming sessions and actually see if we can handle, right, having a philosophical debate whilst we play a game.
PewDiePie's got the gaming things kind of sewn up. So
Sorry.
PewDiePie has the gaming community sewn up.
I'm sure he does, but is he discussing the things we discuss?
No, he discusses racism and being racist and things like that. And we're now
Okay.
about to get report bombed because you're not
are
supposed to criticize PewDiePie.
you not allowed to criticize him?
No,
Okay.
not from his fans.
Well, I don't think any of his fans are actually going to be watching us, though, are they?
I don't know. I reckon some of them might just scan for anybody that says PewDiePie anywhere at any time. But yeah, and like we said, YouTube itself controls the conversation by threats of demonetization and
Hmm.
saying what can and can't be said. But like was also mentioned, it is used in a good way too, because they have the power to insert the COVID notices, the flat Earth notices, the fake information notices.
Yeah, fair
So
enough.
yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it is. I suppose that's power in itself, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah, really.
Yeah.
Power isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. It's how it is expressed and how it is used that makes it good or bad.
I mean, you can even think about kings of the past. There were kings that were very good to their people, and there were kings that were absolutely horrible to their people, and ended up having people revolt against them and behead them, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
And if have you ever heard what's the name of the platform now? Parlay?
no,
Parla?
no, not have that.
That's a new version of YouTube
Oh
crossed
right,
with Twitter, um, but made specifically for free speech. And it's basically just where all the alt-right people go now. It's not very popular. Sargon of Akkad is there, and Atheism is Unstoppable, I think, and a few other liberals who are basically just right-leaning racists.
yeah. I mean, when it comes to America, even their furthest left are still quite centre. So.
Yeah, anything left of Trump is a commie these days. But I think like Tommy Robinson is on there, and Britain First is on there as well. So it shows you what kind of platform it is.
Right. It almost sounds like if I could get our stream to simulcast over there, it could be quite funny. The
Yeah,
amount of hate we would get from these people.
yeah. So again, YouTube, in some ways, their algorithm has worked with the demonetization because it has moved some of the worst offenders off and onto another platform.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough.
So,
Well,
like you said, power it's not necessarily a bad thing. It has its good and its bad sides, the YouTube algorithm. But it's just an interesting one to ponder on.
yeah, definitely. Josh has actually come in with a question saying, "Do you agree more with Hobbes or Rousseau about the state of nature?"
I'm trying to remember what Rousseau said. Um, I know Hobbes argued that it's better to be in a civilization because if we went back to a state of nature, we would lose everything that the civilization has achieved, and I'm in that kind of category.
Yeah, fair. So the answer there was Hobbes, but we can't remember what Russo said.
Yeah,
Josh, do you remember what Russo said? You can let us know in the chat, and it'll pop up to us, and I'll read it out.
I'm getting over a bad cold. My memory's not great. I even had to refresh my memory on the power stuff, so it shows you how bad I am.
And we only did a stream about power last week.
Yeah.
That's fair enough.
I mean, I was bedridden for 2, 3 days, so
Yeah, it's not good.
can't expect much of me tonight. Yeah,
I'm just glad you're back doing this. I really enjoy our conversations.
I do.
Yeah, I hope other people
That's
out
why I
there do.
said you want to do one tonight.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad we're back at it, and hopefully we'll get into a habit of doing at least say Tuesday, Thursday quite regularly. Uh,
Yeah.
what's he saying? He's saying we were better off when we didn't own or claim anything. That was what Russo said.
No, I'm not sure I agree with that.
Yeah,
Um, because
without the rules.
oh, yeah, owning a car is a good thing because it can get you from A to B, and if you're a doctor, it can help you save lives. If you're not allowed to own it and somebody else is allowed to come along and take it, you might not be able to get out and save the lives. There's certain things that shouldn't be owned, like public utilities,
Water.
water, healthcare systems should be a communal government run thing. Private companies shouldn't be allowed to own the right to whether or not we get better.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Um, but I think there is something to be said for private property and private ownership of certain things.
As with everything, it comes down to a bit of a balance.
Exactly. It's what lies in the median.
Yeah, possibly more one way than another, but still that balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um, yeah. Josh says I think he was talking about life before civilization. We had freedom. Um,
Well, did
yes,
we?
to a degree. It wasn't. I mean, this is going back to our podcast on freedom. Um, yeah, I mean, it depends how you're using freedom for one.
Yeah.
Um, you, in some respects, you were less free as well. Surely,
Well, you couldn't get an education.
no.
You
Um,
couldn't go to a hospital. You couldn't enjoy films or anything like that. You were free to masturbate in public, I guess. Poo anywhere you want. But other people were actually free to come along and steal your kill too.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure. I'd definitely agree with that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, freedom is we still have it to quite a big degree. But in a civilization, you have to learn to live with other people.
Yeah.
And learning to live with other people helps us create a better world. Um, like I said, education, healthcare, that kind of stuff. It's better. Transport systems, the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And like we were talking about earlier, there are benefits to even having the restrictions that we now have on the internet with things like, child porn. I mean,
Yeah,
it was great when it was more free before for a lot of things. You didn't get all these ads on places like YouTube and every site that you went to, and you got to have really great conversations with people. But also, certain sites and things like that went completely unchecked. Whereas now, if they manage to locate the server this sort of thing is on, then actually raids happen. They get the IP addresses of the people, they find the providers, etc. So again, it's balance. It's balance. And I do think certain platforms can be a little bit too restrictive, but as I said earlier, it's their platform. They've got the choice to do what they want. And really, if we want a platform that is run the way we want it to be run, then we should create our own platform because we still have the freedom to do that. We might not have the
hence Parlor.
know-how. Yeah, exactly. We might not have the money or the or the know-how. But if we had those things, we could create the ideal platform for us. But then we might find actually people aren't as tied into a platform like that as us because they prefer this one and that one and that one. I mean,
Well, that
sorry.
comes back to power too, in that the bigger companies can shape what social platforms get used most popularly.
Oh yeah. I mean, you consider things like Instagram. Um, it its main thing was at the start, at least, it allowed you to edit your photos in with some really quick and easy filters. It was by far not the best photo editing program out there. It still isn't. It's still quite basic, um, but it was easy. So back to when we were talking about earlier, when the internet was just all the nerds and the geeks and they could be really techie with everything and it could be quite complicated and everyone got it, that was fine. But now we're in a state where things need to be quick and easy. And so Instagram is, oh yeah, click, 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 yeah, that filter looks good, yeah, put that down there, bang, done. And that is why that one survived. And that's why Facebook ended up taking it over, because it was the most used. It wasn't the best. And if they'd taken on the best, it would have been too complicated for the average user.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, I agree with Hobbes more than Rousseau.
That was a massive tangent, wasn't
I-
it? I do
People
apologize.
expect tangents from us.
Yeah, they must do by now. I mean, especially if you've ever signed up to our Patreon page and listened to the unedited podcast. I mean, some of our conversations on the podcast are like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And that's having me cut out about an hour of conversation at least. And sometimes we just I find the conversations interesting, but the reason I cut them out is because they're not necessarily relevant to the topic that we're discussing. I do sometimes leave some of it in there if it's particularly funny, but yeah, there's just big chunks I take out of it. Now, if you enjoy our tangents and things like that, I suggest go and sign up for tier 3 on our Patreon site, because that gives you the unedited access to all of our podcasts. You get them long before anyone else does. That's patreon.com or patreon.com/answers in reason.
Yeah.
And listen to Josh. He says, give us money, so you do it.
Yeah. I mean, we're smart, kind of.
We have the illusion of smartness.
Yeah. Everything's an illusion anyway,
Awesome. Is there anything else you think we need to cover on this topic tonight?
No, not really. I think we've discussed several areas and got the core idea. And like I say, it's something different to the usual conversations.
Yeah, definitely. It's as you say, it's something different to the stuff we usually discuss. I think that's what I like about doing these live streams. The sci-fi streams, they're a little bit different. They're a little bit more free flowing. When we do fresh air, we are discussing things that maybe that might not be the normal narrative within, say, the atheist community, for example. But they're still quite structured subjects. Whereas here we're trying to go with what's a bit more current and what people might be interested in, what we see going on around us, and it definitely gives me a different way to look at things and understand things, and hopefully it does you. If you do have any questions on tonight's conversation, then of course you can leave them in the comments wherever you are around the web, or you can DM us through Twitter, Answers in Reason, or on Facebook, Answers in Reason, or
YouTube?
yeah, YouTube, Answers in Reason, or our website, answers-in-reason.com, or email admin at answers-in-reason.com. There's a theme going here. Just look for Answers in Reason. And in fact, that's something you should do. Look for your answers in reason.
Yep. And we've also got a couple of the topics that we're thinking of covering. And I can't remember what they are now, but we've been discussing a few.
Yeah, we have. One of the ones that I'd like to do is fallacies. Um, and it's how they're used, how they can be used by theists, how they're sometimes used by atheists. We want a balance in the conversation, because we don't want to just present the oh it's only theists or oh it's only atheists, because it's not. We're all guilty of doing them sometimes. Sometimes it's just because we haven't fully thought it through, or sometimes we've just, as we mentioned earlier, we look to Ra for what the answer is. That's an argument from authority. And also times when these things aren't actually fallacies themselves. So you consider the way history works. When you've got a mass consensus of what the evidence means, that is not an argument from authority fallacy. That is historians actually all looking at it separately and going, oh yeah, no, that does seem to indicate that this is the case. So yes, a lamb tagine. Yes, I would love one, Josh. Send it over.
Oh, and another one I was thinking of, the auditing videos, where people go to like prisons and start filming, and
Oh yes.
yeah, and just sort of discussing the philosophy around there, because I find some of them to be a little dishonest in the way they're presenting themselves.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
sorry, and
sorry,
on that subject, other people's videos as well. So we might do sort of a bit of a watch party, if you
yeah,
will. We will take a video from a popular YouTuber, and it's not necessarily to try and insult them or anything like that. We're not looking to do that. What we're looking to do is actually go, how rational are they being with what they're saying? Does what they're saying actually make sense? There, again, as we were saying with the sort of arguments from authority, there are certain YouTubers out there that make these claims of rationality and everything like that, and you've got atheists, say, following them, going, oh yeah, you're spot on, and they make ridiculous things like a rock falling on your head is the universe being immoral, and you're just like,
yeah,
oh really? And they call themselves a philosopher, and you're like, oh.
yeah.
So
So yeah, we got a few ideas coming up.
and honestly, just we're not above reproach. If you want to contact us about anything, if you've got any critique, we are open to that. If you've got any ideas for any of the banners up here or stuff you can see down there within the videos, I mean, as you can see, we are quite new to doing the video thing, so we're trying to present things in the best way possible. So we are looking for different things. So any feedback that you have on what we're doing and the content we're presenting would be great. And yeah, if you got any ideas or you want us to check out a particular video and review it, you
Or
can
blog post.
yeah, blog posts or anything like that. We're up for it. We're looking to do. We want to give you guys something you want, and as long as it's got something to do with, I suppose, philosophy or science in some way, shape, or form, we're quite happy to do it.
Yeah. And also, happy birthday, Josh.
Yeah, happy birthday to you.
I'm not singing, it'll break the camera.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Joshua. Happy birthday to you.
All right, Mick Jagger.
And I think on that note, which was probably quite discorded, we should say good night.
Good night, mate.
Good night. You've been listening to the SciPhi broadcast by Fresh Air, and I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
Good night.
Good night.